Love it or hate it, 2020 made one thing pretty clear. Working remotely or working from home is part of the mainstream now. If I look back honestly at when I first started working from home, almost a decade ago now, it's pretty obvious how much I sucked at it. And let's face it, you're probably here because you feel like you suck at it too. Working from home is not as easy or intuitive or glamorous as it seems. What millions and perhaps even billions of people found out all at once is that working from home is hard. So maybe you're a person who's still required to work from home, or maybe you're being given an option to continue working from home now that your company's a little more comfortable with the idea. Regardless, I thought I'd share some lessons I've learned along the way and give you some tips so that hopefully you can be more successful in working from home in the future. Now, before I get started here, I want to mention a couple caveats. First of all, even though I love working from home, I'll be the first to admit that working from home is not forever. If you watch my recent series on introverts and extroverts, you'll realize that there are probably certain people who are naturally a little more inclined to working from home. Now, whether you're introverted or extroverted, that's not necessarily a gauge of potential work from home success. It's just one factor I wanted to mention in order to say this. If working from home is not suited for you, there's nothing wrong with you. That's okay. I love working from home, for instance, but my wife would not be a person that could work from home, which she'll freely admit. For her, she enjoys going to a place of business, interacting with other people, and she gauges her daily successes a little bit differently than I do. That's fine. My point here is just know yourself and don't force it. Working from home can be learned, but if you feel like you're just working against your personality, maybe it's not for you, and that's okay. Now, the second caveat I want to mention here is I'm imagining that many of you who are watching work for employers. You're used to going to a place of business and then you are thrust into working from home. So I'm mainly talking to people who work for employers in this particular video. If maybe you're just getting started working for yourself or freelancer or contractor or something like that, there will be tips in here for you too, but I'm primarily directing this to people who work for others. All right, so the format I'm going to try to follow is what you're probably doing wrong and what you can do to fix it. So the first thing you're probably doing wrong is not setting boundaries or not setting the right boundaries. Now there's a couple aspects to this. Not setting the right boundaries for yourself and not setting the right boundaries with other people. So first, under setting boundaries with yourself, first of all, put on some damn pants when you go to work. Even though it's just down the hallway, when you're starting your workday, get dressed as if you're going to work. Not only will this help you avoid embarrassing Zoom calls, perhaps, but also helps you get in the right mindset. The second aspect of having better boundaries with yourself is when you work from home, work is always just right there. Now, maybe this isn't something you struggle with, but it was something I really struggled with. I got to the point where I found that I was working nonstop. Having trouble sleeping? Get some work done. Feel a little bored? Get some work done. When you work from home, because work is always just a couple steps down the hallway, it can be really tempting to just get a little bit more work done. And this is probably an expectation that you put on yourself, not that anyone else is expecting from you. I remember a mindset I struggled with when I first started working from home was I fell into the trap of thinking that since I wasn't at the office with everyone else, then they must not think I was working hard. And so I was always doubling or tripling down on the amount of effort. Next thing I knew, I was working 80 hours a week. Remember, your life isn't just about work. And if this is something you struggle with, you need to put boundaries in place to help prevent yourself from doing that. Now, this plays a little bit too into having boundaries with other people. Maybe you do have a boss that expects, well, since you work from home, you're just going to be working all the time. There's also kind of this insidious expectation. And I don't think people do it on purpose, but since you're working from home, they just feel like they can always reach you whenever's convenient for them. Now, this is a little bit of a longer game, but you have to train people that you're not perpetually available. Now, thankfully, when I started working from home, I had a boss who was understanding, but I even had a conversation with my boss that at certain times in the morning, and for me, I was trying to get my morning routine done, but at certain times of the morning, I just was not going to be available, ever. Now, my boss was really accepting, but what I found out was coworkers would never remember this. And to be fair, it's not their job to remember. So I started actually blocking time off on my schedule as if I was in a meeting. And time blocking can not only help you be more productive, But if you work in an environment where other people can see your schedule, time blocking can be a great way to let people know you're not available. Another way you could have boundaries is simply not answer the phone after or before certain times of the day. You do this enough time, people will get the hint and they'll remember. This is especially important if you work in a different time zone from your home office. Now, the next thing you're probably not doing a very good job at is minding your environment. Now, the reason I included this is because some of these tips will also help you have better boundaries. But being more mindful of your environment and what works for you and what doesn't will also help you be a lot more productive and help you avoid some of the burnout that people who work from home seem especially prone to. In a recent video where I shared some productivity tips, one of the tips I gave was to introduce distraction into your work. Now, for those of you who love going to the coffee shop and working, this was probably awesome news to you. But you also have to be mindful of the flip side. Certain types of work benefit from undisturbed silence and aren't appropriate for coffee shops. Now, this is going to be a little bit determined based on the kind of personality you are. But if you take some time to think about what kind of work you get done better at coffee shops and what kind of work you get done better at home, you can try to schedule your day that way. Also, another really great tip is to have some noise-canceling headphones. These things have been lifesavers for me. Actually, the particular ones I have are the Sony WH-1000XM3. Man, that just rolls off the tongue, huh? I'll stick a link to these in the description so you don't have to remember. But one thing that's really cool is this is the previous model to the one that's out now, and so you can actually save quite a bit of money on these, and they're almost just as good as the new ones. These are one of my favorite purchases. And I was a person that never really saw the value of noise-canceling headphones until I used them for myself. Anyway, another way you can control your environment is to designate a physical place in your house that's just for work. For me personally, I set up a spare bedroom as an office, and this has another good side effect. If possible, make sure your physical space has a door that can close. And the reason I mention this is this can be great for your mindset. You go in your office, close the door, it's work time now. But the other reason this can be helpful, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but if you live with people, being able to have a door that closes can be crucial. Now, another way you can manage your environment is to physically change your perspective periodically. This can really help with task switching and making sure you don't mentally fatigue faster. But going back to my earlier example about the coffee shop, maybe some of your work gets done at a coffee shop, some of your work gets done in a home office. Or maybe some of your work gets done in a home office, other parts of your work get done at the kitchen table. Or maybe you'll go for a walk whenever you have to take calls. Just something to break up the monotony of the day and help keep you fresh will go a long way to helping you be more productive. And the reason for this is think about when you're at the office. Think about how many opportunities you have to take little micro breaks away from work, whether that be water cooler conversations or trips to the cafeteria or whatever it might be. Essentially, you're trying to replicate that for yourself while you're at home. You might have times where you can just naturally push through and get work done for hours, but you'll find a lot more often than not, you need to change it up a little bit to stay fresh. All right, the next thing you're probably not doing a very good job at is communicating, both with your coworkers and with the people you live with. So let's deal with the most obvious one first, the people you live with. Now, obviously, if you're working from home and your spouse or roommate or whoever else that lives with you is also working from home, this is even more crucial. But I want to focus on a scenario where you're working from home and the people you live with are not, because that can be a tougher communication challenge. On one hand, you need to sit down and have a conversation with them that just because you're home doesn't mean it's time to relax and hang out when they get home. I know this one might seem really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people I see it never occurs to them to have this conversation, and then there's friction for no reason. Now, conversely, just like you need to help the people you live with understand that you're working, you also have to realize that when they get home, they're not working. They're coming home, unwinding for the day, trying to relax, and you have to understand that it's not work time for them. It's a two-way street. Now, a further recommendation I have for this, besides just having the conversation with them, is it can be really helpful to develop signals. Now, I love my wife dearly, but when she gets home, it's like a freight train rolls through the house. And again, she's not home to work. It doesn't always occur to her that being loud, cooking dinner, doing the dishes, playing with the cats, whatever it is she's doing, might be distracting me. So besides having the door closed, I actually bought this little sign. Actually, I'll show it to you. I think it was like $10 or something, but it just attaches to the door and it slides back and forth, and it helps let her know when being quiet is more important than other times. There'll be times I have the door closed where I'm just plugging away at something and she doesn't need to be super quiet. But then there are other times, maybe I'm in a meeting or a Zoom call or something like that, where she does need to be quiet. So when she gets home, she just takes a peek at the door and it helps let her know what's going on. I've heard of people setting up a little on-air sign outside their door, but the main point here is to just have some kind of system that helps the other person know. It's not their responsibility to be a mind reader and to know when you need to be able to do deep focused work. Now, real briefly here, I just also want to mention communicating with your coworkers. Now, if you're in a situation where most of your company has gone remote, you might notice the company culture has started to suffer a little bit. There is just something that's more natural about seeing people face to face. You get to know each other better. People have more organic conversations. And that stuff just doesn't happen if everyone's remote. Something I learned over time is that it's actually really valuable to replicate some of those, what I call water cooler conversations, even though you're working remote. This helps you connect with your peers, also helps build camaraderie, and helps you and your peers be a little bit more forgiving if things don't happen exactly the way that they were supposed to. So a tip I have is if there are coworkers that you need to work particularly close with, take some time, actually schedule a meeting sometime in the week just to catch up with them, see how they're doing. 15, 20 minutes, it doesn't take long. Now, you do have to be disciplined that these don't become hours and hours long conversations and that you're not getting work done. But it's still a good idea to put some effort into having non-task oriented types of meetings and conversations with your coworkers. This will help you, your boss, your coworkers. It'll help to everyone feel a little bit more plugged into each other, even though you're not seeing each other every day. Now, another thing you're probably not doing well, speaking of meetings, is you're probably not being very strategic about your meetings. Now, I'm a person that has a special distaste for meetings in general, but they are kind of a necessary evil. And what I mean specifically here is when people start to work remote, you can feel the need to have even more meetings than normal. I think some of this might be a subconscious kind of trying to overcompensate for not being able to see people in person. But what you don't realize is meetings when you're remote are extra draining for some reason. And they also can seem to sabotage progress in your day even more than a regular meeting if you were seeing a person face to face. So my advice here is to be mindful of how many meetings you have. I understand there are probably some meetings that you can't get out of, but if you have the option, don't just take every meeting that comes your way, or maybe be strategic about when those meetings are happening, because you're gonna need to be able to kind of take a little break, switch your mindset to the next thing before diving in. Don't have back-to-back meetings. Give yourself at least 15 minutes between meetings to kind of reorient yourself. If you feel yourself feeling super drained at the end of the day, even more so than you were when you were working at the office, this might be the culprit. And you might need to be a little bit more strategic about how you're planning your meetings. Another thing you're probably doing wrong is not resisting the urge to always be on. Now, I mentioned this a little bit before, but I feel it's important enough to mention all on its own. Maybe you're struggling with the problem I discussed earlier where you felt the need to kind of always prove yourself, prove that you were getting work done and being productive. Or maybe you have a supervisor that really doesn't buy into the whole remote work thing, and they like to micromanage and make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. Whatever the reason, let the results of your work speak for itself. Do not fall into the trap of thinking you have to prove how productive you're being all the time. The interesting thing is when you work remote, all you have to speak for your work is the work itself. So that means you actually need to get the work done, but it also means it'll be really obvious if you're not getting the work done. And you don't have to waste 2/3 of every day proving to other people that you're getting your work done. Just get your work done. All right, my next tip here is to have a morning routine. Now, I know I've talked about this in a couple other videos before. I mentioned having a morning routine in passing. And I also know that there are a lot of people I know included, that don't think having morning routines are a very big deal, but they are. Now, I mentioned this a little bit in the tip about having better boundaries, but there's another reason having a morning routine can be really valuable. And that is when you're working from home, you don't have a kind of baked in morning routine before you get to work anymore. The really obvious thing is obviously you don't have a commute. So what you want to do is to approximate that in some way by having your own morning routine. Try to avoid, if possible, waking up, brushing your teeth, and getting right to work. Maybe like me, you like to make some drip brew coffee, read a couple chapters of your favorite book, squeeze your workout in, and then settle into your day. But whatever those things are for you, I highly recommend having a morning routine because this will help you keep some of those better boundaries between home life and work life. Plus, you won't be allowing work to eat into the time that should be dedicated to things that are important to you. Now, this next point here is something I feel I need to mention. I actually don't know if many of you are experiencing this since working from home right now is so widespread. But when I started working from home, it was still very rare and not commonly accepted. And a lot of stereotypes came with that. Oh, people who work from home are lazy, or people who work from home never get out of their pajamas, or people that work from home are just trying to avoid scrutiny because they can't really hack it in the regular workplace. Now, maybe you won't deal with this as much because since so many more people are working from home, there's a lot more people that know actually what it takes to be able to work from home well. But if this is something you are dealing with, I just want to encourage you not to take heart of the judgment or criticism or the stereotypes. People that are making those judgments have no idea what it's like to actually work from home. Don't allow their judgments to bother you because they have no idea what they're talking about. And in fact, some of it might be projection. They might assume that when you're working from home, you're being lazy because that's what they'd do if they were working from home. Regardless, it's not your circus, not your monkeys. It doesn't need to be your problem to deal with. It's their problem. Now, if you find yourself starting to get the hang of working from home, but you're still feeling like you're not being as productive as you could be, check out this video right over here where I give some productivity tips that you may not have thought of before. All right, well, that's going to be it for me. Please make sure if you found the video helpful to give it a thumbs up. It really does help other people find this video. And if you have any tips or ideas about working from home, things that you've learned that maybe I haven't mentioned, share them with the rest of us in the comments. Love to hear your thoughts. All right, have a good one. Later on.